Hello, everyone, and welcome. Normally, you would find me behind the scenes, but today, for my very first time, I'm in front of the camera. My name is Vincent, and I work for real developers in the role of developers research and community management, and I'm super happy to have you all here. Before we get started with this amazing session, just an info. Feel free to engage. Use the chat and Q&A section. After this workshop, we'll have some time to answer all your questions. Also, would like to give a shout out to all our partners. Without them, this event wouldn't be possible. Thanks to our main partners, media partners, and of course, especially our community partners. And with that said, I think it's time to kick off this session with Sumit is the founder and leadership coach at Deploy Yourself. In his bio, I read this marvelous sentence: I help people realize how powerful they are. I'm sure he will explain what's behind that message. Let's welcome him on stage. Hi, Sumit. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect. Tell us, what are we going to learn from you today?
Today, I'm going to talk about communication and influence for techies.
Okay.
And this is most of my learnings from my own journey as I started as a software engineer and then slowly started to learn communication and influence, which became more important as I grew in the leadership ranks. And this is part of everything which I do today.
That sounds amazing. I would say, without further ado, the stage is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me. As I said, today I want to share a little bit about communication and influence for techies. And I'm going to take an unconventional look at conversations and present to you something which you don't often hear. And most of it is coming from my own learnings, my own stuff, which I have learned the hard way. And I want to keep it very simple today. But before we start, I have a few requests for all of you. My first request is that stay open to what I am sharing. And what I mean by that is that feel free to disagree with what I am sharing, but play around with what I am sharing, because some of the thoughts and ideas which I might share might be unusual or might not make sense to you. So I invite you to disagree, but do not outright reject what I am saying. Second request which I have is that while there might be hundreds of people here, assume that I am talking to you personally. Assume that this is about your life and we are engaging in a one-on-one conversation. And the third request which I have is that a lot of what I will share is also about practical implementation. It is not just about theory and learning some concept. So take it out in your life, in your work, and try it out and see what happens. So let's move. As I said, I want to keep it very simple, and I want to talk about the most powerful tool we have as humans, and which is our language and the conversations we have. I have a very simple agenda today. So I will start by sharing a bit about my own story, how I came to where I am today. And then I want to share my 4 biggest learnings about communication and influence. And those learnings are, the first one focuses on listening, the critical role of listening in communication and influence. The second one is how we see language, how we often mistake language for something less than what it is, and how it can be a very powerful tool to move where we want to go. My next learning, I will take you a little bit deeper into listening and see different levels of listening and how can you use that in your day-to-day life. And the fourth one is about difficult conversations, which is, I think we all deal as software engineers, as techies, we all deal with communication issues when it comes to commercial people, business people. So I'll take a deep dive into difficult conversation and even suggest some practical tips which you can take out and apply in your work. So to start with, I'm Sumit. So apart from everything which I do, I am also a father and a husband. And I am currently dialing in from Amsterdam. And I want to share a little bit about myself in 2 ways. First is what most people know about me. And the second is what most people do not know. So I have been programming since 1996. This has been a big passion of mine. And it has been more than 20 years that I have been programming almost very regularly. I have been leading software development teams since 2007. So it has been 12 years 12 or 13 years that I have been leading teams in one form or the others. I have worked in companies like Booking.com, Yahoo, and many other companies. First in India and now also in Europe. I have started two companies of my own. I have started one NGO of my own, and that is where my passion for leadership, that is where my passion for communication started. I have started and run multiple activist campaigns. This was mostly when I was back in India, but I've done a lot of work around organizing people, and from where I draw a lot of my lessons on leadership and communication. Apart from that, I'm also a travel and street photographer based here in Amsterdam. And today I coach leaders from all over the world around topics around leadership, and communication is a big part of that. This is the interesting part. So the first slide which I shared is stuff which you will find everywhere on my LinkedIn, everywhere, what people know about me. Let me share a little bit about what most people do not know about me. And the first one is that as a techie, as a geek, I have spent my whole life trying to hide myself, being invisible. And I have used my computer first and later my camera when I picked up photography to hide behind the world, to not communicate directly, but to put it as a shield. And I have always been scared of being seen and putting myself out there in the open. I have avoided conflict at all costs, even disagreements. I would run away and I would close down a conversation if I hint that there is a disagreement or a conflict coming on. And I used to say that I can only talk to computers, not people. And so a huge blind spot for me, because when I started leading teams, this became a huge bottleneck as I realized that leading teams is much more than being good at your software engineering job. And I have learned my lessons the hard way. So everything which I'm going to be shared is coming from my own learning. And I also want to put it out in the open that for a long time, I have not done public events like this one, just because I had this view in my head that I am a shy person or I am not good at public. So who I am today, as Vincent introduced, today I help people see how powerful they are. And what I mean by that is the power of conversations and the power of creating the results that we want in our life. So let's move on to the first of the 4 points which I mentioned. And during the session, if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, any comments, feel free to share them in the chat, share them in the Q&A section. And I or Vincent will try to pick it up as and when possible. And we will also have a dedicated Q&A at that. So the first big lesson which I learned is that conversation actually happen in our listening, not in our speech. What I mean by that, let me take a few simple examples. So when two people are talking, there are always 3 conversations going on. What do I mean by that? I mean that if 2 people are talking, you can see the words being spoken. So you can listen to what is being said. That is the one conversation which is happening in the outside world, which is visible for everybody to hear and see. But at the same time, there are 2 other conversations happening in the listening of these 2 people. So let's say if A and B are talking, so everything which A is saying, B is not only listening to what is being said, what are the exact words which are being communicated, but B is also interpreting and B is also listening to their internal conversation around what A is saying. And similarly for the other side. So when I say there are 3 conversations happening, there is one external conversations which everybody can listen to, everybody can hear, but there are 2 internal conversations which only the individual people are able to listen to or to make sense of. And why is this important? This is important because out of these 3 conversations, the 2 conversations which are most important are what is not visible to us on the outside. Because people will react, people will respond, people will take action or do not take action based on what they are listening, not what you are saying, and based on how they are listening to what you are saying. So that's what I mean by that there are 3 conversations happening at any point of time. The second point which I want to address here is that everybody listens differently. And based on our history, based on our cultures, based on the language, based on the country we come in, based on our past experiences, our successes, our failures, each one of us listens differently. We all hear the same thing. If somebody is talking, we all hear the same thing, but we are listening something different. And each one of us is unique in that point. And in a way, listening is translating what is being spoken to what I understand. So listening is instant, like constant, always running interpretation and translation of what I am hearing. And this includes not only the words being spoken, but also the way they are being spoken. So this includes a tone of voice. This includes the body language of the other person. And I am always interpreting that. And I am always creating a listening in my head based on what the other person is saying. For example, even now, when I am speaking, each one of you would be listening differently. So some of you might be listening as this is something which I have heard before. Or some of you might be listening as this is something new to me. Another person might listen to what I am sharing is that I do not have time for this, or this is a waste of time. So each one of us listens differently. And more than what I am speaking out, the words which are coming out of my mouth, what matters is how each one of you is listening. The impact of my presentation today, the impact of what I am sharing today is going to be determined more by how you are listening rather than what the exact words I am sharing. Let's move on. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. We are always speaking from a listening, and we are always speaking into listenings. So to take an example, I have a listening of my own. And I have a listening that I am a software engineer turned leadership coach. So that's where I am coming from. So that's my listen. And now that I am speaking from that listen. And if I have a different listening, if I have a different internal listening, I would speak differently. Similarly, I am always speaking into different listenings of all of you, of all of the audience. We never speak into a vacuum. We never speak into a unanimous space. We speak into a sea of listenings. So when I am talking to somebody, the way the other person is listening to me will depend on what their listening is and what their background is. And to not be mindful of this, is a huge blind spot which we miss. So when it comes to communication, we focus so much on what to say, how to present our message. But what we miss out is, are we speaking from the right listening? So let's say I join a new company and I'm talking to my manager and I have a sense of fear or I have a sense of anxiety. That will determine everything which I say. That will influence every word which comes out of my mouth. So my internal listening will shape how I speak out in the world. And to not be mindful of that is only going to work against me. If I am mindful of that I am new to this company, I am new to this manager, and because of that, I'm a little bit anxious, I'm a little bit doubtful, then what can I do to speak from a different listening, to speak from a place where I am confident or where I am at ease? Similarly, when I was talking to somebody, what is the listening that they have? And then a very powerful question to ask yourself is that, is there a listening for my speaking? Because unless there is a listening for your speaking, whatever you're trying to communicate, whatever you're speaking will not land as you want it to land. To take an example, you want to talk to your manager about something very important. And you go up to your manager's desk and say, can I talk about or something? And the manager says that I am in a hurry, I have to go to a meeting. So I have 5 minutes for you and let's talk about it. And now you have a choice, right? So if your issue is critical and if you see that the manager is hurried or they have only 5 minutes, so they will not be able to give full attention to what you have to say. In a way, the manager at this point of time does not have a listening for what you want to communicate. And then if you understand that, you might stop there. You might say, instead of using that 5 minutes to talk about your critical issue, You might say that this is an important issue for me. Let's schedule another time. Let's schedule when you can talk, listen to me with attention. I do not want to disturb you because you have another meeting lined up. So focusing on whether there's a listening for my speaking allows me to choose when to speak, what I have to choose, what I have to speak. Similarly, there is a different listening for all of us at different times of the day and different times of the week. So we are normally ready, we are normally more excited to get into work on Monday. We are a bit off, we are a bit tired, both mentally and physically by Fridays. And the same cycle goes from the morning, afternoon to evening. And if I am being conscious about that, I can use or I can schedule my communication, I can schedule my meetings when the other person has the best listening for what I want to share. So if I want to talk about planning, if I want to talk about creating a big vision as a leader, I would be very mindful of doing it on a Friday afternoon because I would know that my audience most likely will not have a listening of dreaming big or of visioning big. And obviously, this depends on the audience, this depends on the culture, company, country where you are located in. But what I'm suggesting is to be mindful of that. And if you sense that you do not have the listening for your communication, for your speaking, the question which comes up is that what can you do to create that listening for others? This could be asking for a dedicated time, or this could be clearing up something in the past. If you have let's say if you have a bad argument with your manager, and then the next day you want to have a conversation, there will be this old listening of yesterday's conversation. And that might impact what you have to say on the next day. And how do you create a listening? That might involve having a conversation about yesterday first. If we had a conversation yesterday which went heated and I want to clarify, I want to apologize, whatever is required to clear that space up, and then bringing on your next agenda. Instead of piling things over old, unheard of listenings, which is always there in the background, but it is not visible to us and it makes a big difference. So that's the first big lesson which I have learned around communication, that communication and speaking is all about listening. In fact, I would even say, and I say this to leaders all the time, that the product, the output of your leadership, of your influence, is the listening you produce in others. If the listening you produce in others is that this person is trustworthy, or this person keeps their promises, then everything you say will become easier. However, if you have a listening that this person is not trustworthy, or I cannot rely on this person based on whatever has happened in the past, then everything you say, you will have to like an uphill battle. So as a leader, your product, more than your projects, your outcome, is the listening which you're producing in others, because behind the scenes, it will influence, it will impact every word, every communication which comes out of your mouth. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson, which I have learned about language, is that language is not merely a tool for communication or describing something. Language is actually a tool for creating. And we are already doing so. We are already using language to create results in our life and also to create how we sense something is there. So, how we experience something is also created in language. Let's take an example. So, remember every time that you have said yes or no in the past. And every time you say yes to something, you create a different future. So, something in the future changes because you said yes to something. And it is not trivial. If I ask you to meet me at 5 p.m. in the evening and you say yes, you have created a new future which was not going to happen otherwise. Similarly, if you say no, that's also a new feature you're creating. And if we zoom out a little bit, how are teams created? How are companies created? Even how are countries created? Even acts of creation of teams, of countries and companies happen in language. So somebody declares that like the US had a declaration of independence. So somebody declared that there will be a union of states, and that's what creates a country. Similarly, a company is also declared, and you can find this in the legal documents, but a company starts to exist when it is declared legally. Similarly, a team is also created first of all in language. Another very relevant example is marriage. How do two people go from being just two human beings to being husband and wife, to being partners? It is when somebody in authority uses language and declares, whether it is a priest, whether it is a court order, whether it is a municipality declaration, but somebody says that you are married now, and that's when you become married. So that's the power of language, which I want you to realize. And now I want to ask a question. If you want something in the future, if you want to produce a result in the future, and that could be a promotion, that could be a hike in salary, that could be a different role, ask yourself this question: what is the request or offer which you're not making? So what are the requests and offers that you can make which can help you move towards the future? And if you have a future which you want to create, if there is a result which you want to see in your future and it is not there yet, ask yourself, what is the missing conversation that I am not having? And what is the next conversation that I can have to move towards that future? For example, if I want to get promoted, if I want to become a senior engineer, one request I can have is to ask for people to mentor me. So I make a request, can you mentor me? These are my goals, can you mentor me? As soon as the person says yes, that yes creates a new future. So now you are in a mentoring relationship. Going out and talking to your manager about your future dreams is again one such conversation. So every time you have a future result which you want or which you want to move toward, ask yourself, what is the conversation that is missing? What is the specific request which I can ask somebody else to do? Or what is the offer that I can make? Like, I offer to lead this presentation. I offer to lead this offsite. I offer to lead this meeting. These are all offers which you can make, which when they get accepted, when they are met with a yes, that's what creates a new future. I want to share something which neuroscience is discovering now. And this is a quote by a neuroscientist called Anil Seth. And he says that we are all hallucinating all the time. And what he means by this is that each one of us is creating a different world in our different listenings. So each one of us has a unique listening, and each one of us is creating a different world based on what we see, what we hear, what we touch, and what we experience in the world. And there's also a famous quote which comes to mind as I talk about this, which says that we see the world as we are, not the way the world is. To give you an example, let's say this image. There are two squares here on which A and B are written. And if you see the color of these two squares, you will see that the colors are different. That's how you will listen to it. But let me present something. So these two are actually the very same colors. So the reality which our mind is creating, that these two are separate colors, is just an illusion. Why? If you draw these vertical lines, you can see that these two colors are the same colors. And even now, even after knowing that, when you look at the first image, it is still difficult to distinguish that, because that's a hallucination or a version of reality that our mind has created. So the key message here is that we are all confusing what we see or hear as reality. For example, let's say a manager shouts at an employee. One person creates the manager as rude in their own listening because of their experiences or because of whatever. And the other person might create that same manager as ambitious or as holding somebody accountable. To give you a very personal example, when I first came to Europe, I came from India, which is a very hierarchical and a top-down culture. And one thing I realized is that if a manager is very out there, is very energetic, is very directing his team, giving new ideas, in India, that would be seen as a strong manager, as somebody who holds others accountable, who demands from other people. But if you do the same thing in Europe, which is a very different culture, you might be seen as micromanaging, or you might be seen as. So the difference here is in the listening of the two people. And if you are not mindful of that, that can lead to blindness, which you might not be aware of. So that's the crux of it. Now, this is something which I found very funny about human beings, and we all do this. So let me share this. So something happens, an event happens in the world. Let's say manager shouts or manager does something, and we make a story about it. The story might be the manager is rude. The story might be the manager is wonderful because he is holding people accountable. The story might be that I don't like this or something like that. And the next thing which we do as human beings is that we believe the story to be true, right? Because we are talking about this only because we take action based on not what is happening outside in the world, but how we are listening to it. And we believe the story to be true, and then we forget that we made it up. So this is a 4 simple points, but this is not trivial. This is very simple, but this is not trivial. This is very critical. So something happens, we make story about it, we believe the story to be true, and then we forget that we made it up. And then we start acting from believing that story to be true. And you can see this all the time. You can see this all the time. To share very personal example, which I shared earlier, when I first started public speaking in my school, I think I was a teenager, a very young person. I still remember I got laughed at. People laughed because of whatever reason. And I made a story. I interpreted that I do not have confidence. I do not have confidence to talk in front of large groups or large audience. And I did not realize that this is a story I created rather than this is what was my trait. Like confidence is not something which you can measure like your height or your weight. You do not have less or more confidence as an entity, as a measurable entity. It's a story. And because of this story, it stopped me from actually speaking in events like this, but also standing up to my team in large settings and present my ideas. And it stopped me. So coming back to where we started, Anil Seth, the neuroscientist which I mentioned, he says that we are all hallucinating all the time. And it is just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality. So if a lot of people agree about a particular hallucination, we call that reality. And the way to distinguish what is happening and the story which I'm making is to ask yourself, what would a camera see and what would a microphone hear? If I were to put a microphone and a camera, everything which the microphone and the camera would pick up is a fact, is something which is happening. And everything else is a story, which we are adding over that. Now, I have a question. Does a fish knows that it lives in water? A fish who has been in a lake or in the ocean does not know that it lives in water. In fact, the only time a fish realizes that it is in water is when you take the fish out of water. And that's the first time the fish sees something else. And I say that we live in language just like fish lives in water. There is a quote by Mark Twain which comes to mind, which is, I am always in conversation and only sometimes other people are involved. So even when I am not talking, even if there is no external conversation going on, there is always an internal conversation going on. Our brain is constantly thinking, constantly seeing whatever it is sensing from the outside world and making a story. This is nothing wrong. Right? This is hardwired into us to make sense of the world around us and to stay safe. If I see something happening and I make a story about it, that allows me to take action. So this is how we operate as a human being. And this is not something which is a bug. In fact, it's a feature. So we live in language and we are always in a conversation, whether it is with our internal state or it is with somebody else. Now, a question which you can ask, and we'll talk about in the next topic around 3 levels of listening as well. A question you can ask yourself is that, is this a fact or is it a story? And a fact is something which is the same for everybody, which is an objective truth, which can be measured. For example, if I say the weather is 20 degrees outside, that is a fact. Everybody can go out and take the measurement and will get the same result. But if I say that the weather is cold or cold or warm, I am actually not describing the weather. I am describing how I am listening to the weather or how I am interpreting the 20 degrees. Because for one person, 20 degrees might be warm, or for another person, 20 degrees might be cold. And another way to ask this question is, what would a camera see? What would an instrument observe? So if you put an instrument, it would observe 20 degrees. It would not say warm or hot unless it is programmed into it. And we're talking about this because we all know that to produce a results, we need to take action. So all results come from our actions. But where do our actions come from? Our actions come from the stories that we are creating. So if I create a story that the weather is warm outside, I will take a very different action, like wearing a t-shirt. And if I create a story that the weather is cold outside, I might take a very different action, like picking up a jacket. So our stories determine every action we take. And then action determines the result we produce. So if you do not have the results, the question which we normally ask is that, what is the action I am taking? What is the new action I can take? But to go another level deeper, you can also ask this question, what is the story that I am living in? What is the story that I am making? And what is an alternate story that I can create? And as human beings, we create a lot of things. We create software. We create physical objects like cars, stuff like that. Why do we do that? We always create something for a particular outcome. So we create software to meet a business outcome. We create a vehicle to go from A to B. Similarly, ask yourself, why do you create a story? Because it is your creation. So if you have a story that your manager is rude or the manager is a certain way, or a company is a certain way, ask yourself, why are you creating that story? For the sake of what result are you creating that story? Facts never stop you from producing a particular result in the future. What stops you is your stories. And that's where it gets fascinating and also a little bit provocative. And that's why I said in the beginning that stay open to what I am sharing. You do not have to agree with me, but play around with it and see what happens. Take it outside in your world, experiment with it and see what happens. And I want to make a disclaimer. I'm not asking you to not make stories. I'm not saying stories are bad. What I'm saying is that be mindful of the stories you're making. Because your stories determine which actions you will take and which results you will produce. Let me take another very simple but very powerful example. I have this pen in my hand right now. Right? This is a physical object. I can touch this pen. I can sense this pen. I can see this pen. This is a pen which exists independent of me. If I am not seeing this pen, if I am not here, the pen is still there. What are our problems? If I have a problem, does that problem exist independent of me? And the point I'm making here is that our problems is a story which we have created. I'm not saying they're not real. I'm not saying we should not create those stories, but I'm saying our problem is a creation of our mind, any problem. And similarly, any possibility, any opportunity in the future is not physical like a pen. That's the difference between a pen, a problem, and a possibility. That a pen is physical, it's objective, it is a fact, it exists outside of me. But if I create a problem, if I say this is a bad pen or this is an ugly pen, That is not describing the pen. That is describing how I am creating a story about the pen. Or if I say this is a wonderful pen, or if I say this is my lucky pen, that is again describing how I interpret this pen. So a lot to digest, a little bit provocative, but let's move on. Let's take a deeper dive into listening. And let's talk about 3 levels of listening. So the first one is what we have just spoken about. And even before going there, there is a level 0 of listening, which is we are not even listening. We are thinking of what to speak next. So we are not even listening to the other person, but we are thinking about what do we have to communicate. So the first level of listening is listening for facts versus listening for stories. Let's say I joined a new company. I walk into my new team and my teammate says, watch out for our manager. He's whatever, he is something. And that's a story. Do I take that as at face value, or do I ask for the facts behind it? Okay, you're telling me the manager is this. What happened? So listening for facts versus believing the stories which you're getting at face. So if you join your company and everybody says the culture is screwed in this company, do you believe that, or do you listen deeply to the facts and make your own stories rather than believing whatever stories you're receiving from others? That's the first level of listening. The second level of listening is listening for emotions and listening for what the other person cares about. And behind the words which we are speaking, which anybody is speaking, there is always a certain emotion, which is visible normally in the tone of voice or in body language. Are we listening to that? Or are we only listening to the words, the language of it? And why is this important? Because every emotion tells us what do we care about. If I am angry or frustrated, something, it tells me that something which I care about is not being met. If I am happy, it tells me that something which I care about is being met. So when I'm listening to somebody, when I'm talking to somebody and I can see a sense of frustration, I can listen to the frustration and ask the person, what is it that is important to you that is not being met or that I am not providing, that you are getting frustrated? Or you can ask very gently that I see some frustration, I sense some frustration. Is that because of something I did? Can you share a little bit more about that? And similarly, when somebody is excited, happy, jumping with joy, you can ask them, tell me what happened. What is it so meaningful about it that makes you? This is very important to build your influence, because now you start to see what people care about. This is a way for you to understand the different listenings that different people have. And if you know that one person cares about architecture, you can talk to him in a way that takes care of what he or she cares. If you understand that one person talks about business growth or revenue growth, then you can tailor your communication in a way that it lands in that list. So listening for the emotions and understanding what is it that they care about that is causing that emotion to come up allows you to tailor your communication and build influence, which would not be possible. Otherwise, it's like you are speaking something, but you're playing darts. It's in a dark room. So you do not even know where the dark. The third level of listening is listening for possibilities that take care. So you care about something. Let's say you care about your promotion. Your manager cares about, let's say, business growth. So your manager wants the business to grow or some metric to grow. Now, when you're talking to your manager, can you listen for possibilities that take care of your care as well as their care? For example, if I can listen for a possibility that I take on this project, which will allow me to grow in my career as well as help the team improve its metrics, then that will be an automatic win-win situation. So if I can learn to listen for possibilities that take care of my care as well as the other person's care, that gives me a lot of opportunities to speak into, which otherwise I had no option. Let's tie this whole thing up and talk about difficult conversation. Difficult. When we put this word difficult in front of conversations, Is it describing the conversation, or is it describing how we see that particular conversation? So difficult is not an attribute of the conversation. Difficult is a story which I am making. To give an example, I am having conversations all day these days, the whole day, which I used to call difficult or challenging. So difficulty is not about the conversation. Difficulty is about my skill. Difficulty is about my ability. And a new way, a new story, a new interpretation you can add to a conversation which might seem difficult is new or unpracticed or a place where I can explore. I used to say a lot that I am not good with business people and commercial people. Okay, I can talk to techies, but I'm not good with business people. Instead of that, I started to say that I just need more practice and I need some new learning. What that did was it created a place for exploration and new learning. While if I say difficulty or I am not good, it closes that space for new learning to happen. Now, at the same time, as a techie, you have your certain strengths. And this is true for me. This was true for me. And I've seen it true for many software engineers. So I'm sharing this, but this might not be true for you. One thing which I was already good at is listening. Because I was introverted, I was shy. I used to listen to not just what people say, but also what is behind that. So that was already my strength. The only question is, am I too nervous in a meeting to listen or to focus on my nervousness? So if I move my attention from my difficulty of being in a conversation to listening, then I can actually use it because it is my strength. I already do this well. Preparation. Another way to deal with difficult conversations, especially as techies, as geeks, is preparation, because we like to prepare. As introverts, as people, we love preparation. So we can prepare about the meeting. We can prepare about the people in the meeting. We can look at our history with those people and we can prepare accordingly. And if we know more, if we have more information, then what we have to say is going to land well with the people. The third one is practice. And this is very powerful because difficulty is not a function of the conversation. Difficulty is a function of how much practice do you have. So if you have a particular conversation, any conversation, hundreds of times, I bet it will not be difficult for you if you are open to learning, and it will slowly become easier over time. So one way we can prepare, we can get better at conversations is by practicing. This could be practicing with our colleague, with somebody in our family, with our manager, with a coach, with a trusted mentor, advisor, anybody. So you can go and ask somebody, I have a difficult conversation coming up. This is what I want to say. Can you role play? Can you practice this with me? And can you show me a better way to doing it? So practicing is one way you can get better and you can leverage a strength which you already have. And again, bringing curiosity and listening rather than heaviness, like I have to get this. This is a crucial conversation. I do not want to mess it up. That heaviness makes it difficult to learn. Instead of you bring it with openness and curiosity, and you focus on listening on what is happening around you, not what you're speaking, but how others are listening to you, you can actually learn a lot. But you can learn all of that if you create that mood of openness and curiosity. And if you're speaking not to prove yourself, you're speaking to understand the other person. That's what focusing on listening means. You're focusing on how the other person is making sense of you. And then the third level of listening, which was to create possibilities. So you focus on listening for possibilities that take care. A very practical tip, if you see yourself losing your attention on listening and getting anxious, is to focus on your breathing and taking a deep breath. And you can do this in any meeting, in any conversation. You can just take a deep breath. And that allows you that space to refocus your attention from wherever it is, from whichever story it is, back onto your listening, onto how the other people are listening to you. This is very powerful, people. So these were the 4 points. These were the four of my biggest learnings around communication, which I have learned the hard way. I also write a lot. So I have created a lot of written material also, like articles and reports. And I'm also putting that at the end of this conversation, which you can download separately. And yeah, so Vincent, do we have any questions right now? These are some more articles which I have. Yes, you're muted.
Sorry for that. What an impressive session. Thank you so much. I think before we kick off the Q&A, I would like to ask you one question from my side. How did your tech career start?
I started with a deep passion about computers and programming. And as I shared, I have been programming since 1996. And that was the time when the computer craze was picking up. Internet was very new. And as an introverted, as a shy person, that was something which I felt like I was good at. I could press buttons and I could see magic happening on the computer. So it gave me a sense of control. And I really enjoyed going deep into that space of computers, software. And that's how I think I was back in school when I knew that this would be a career for me. I was very clear about that.
That sounds amazing.
That's how it started.
Perfect. That sounds amazing. I think most of the developers think maybe the same way. And yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you for that. So I think now it's time to answer some questions from the community. So let's see. Perfect. So I get two questions from Nick. Let's take the first one. As a manager, how would you adapt a win-win scenario with an ambitious employee who may create for you potential insecurities about their own role by the ambitious nature?
Yes. So very good question, Nick. I think you are already getting a bit deeper. You're listening to your own insecurities here, right? And I want to acknowledge. So rather than saying that I am threatened by an ambitious employee, you're saying, how can I deal with my own insecurity, which might happen as a result of an ambitious person? First of all, I want to acknowledge you on listening to what is happening inside of you. And then what I would suggest is understand where the other person is coming from. Listen to the other person and listen what is behind their ambition. And then map that to the team's goals, which are your goals, which are your outcomes, which are promised. And if you can create opportunities for this person, to take care of their ambition and allowing them to prosper, as a manager, you will grow. Like if this person grows and does well, your team will do better. And then there is no way there is no reason for you to be insecure. So what I would like to challenge that insecurity. In fact, I would actually invite you to create a new story of collaboration with this person. How can you work with this person as a collaborator and create opportunities, not just for this person and your team to grow, but as a result for your growth as well? So that's how I would answer that.
Perfect. Thanks. Let's see. There's another question also from Nick. As an employee, how would you adapt to a manager interpreting your ambition as arrogance, perhaps a defense mechanism against their own insecurities?
Yes. So first of all, what you are sharing is how you are interpreting something which the manager did. Right? So if you're ambitious and your manager sees that as arrogant, you're interpreting what the manager is doing in their behavior as their insecurity, which might not be fully aware to you unless they have told you that. This is like, I don't like ambitious people because of whatever history. So first of all, get aware of that. And secondly, engage into a conversation with that manager and ask this person, how do you like to work? And also share about how do you like to work. Ask them about their preferences. And then when you ask them, then you listen to their emotions. You listen to what is coming up. So if your ambition is creating frustration or some resistance for them, then you do not just go on your ambitious role. You stop there and you address that emotion. Because if there is no listening for your ambition, That's where it meets the rubber meets the road. If there is no listening, for your ambition is more likely to do damage than good, either for you or for the manager or for the entire team. So do you have a listening in the manager, in your teammates for your ambition? Are they seeing your ambition as arrogance or as wanting to help the company, wanting to help the team? If you create a listening in your manager for yourself as somebody who is stepping up and who is taking up more than what he or she is accountable for, then that story shifts. So a good question to ask is that, how do I shift the listening in my manager from arrogance or whatever it is to a listening of collaboration and to a listening of me taking a bigger road, or me stepping up, not for my own ego or whatever, but for the team, for something which connects with the manager's cares as well. So if the manager cares about the team, how can you take care of that concern? How can you take care of that as well as taking care of your own ambition or your own want for growth?
Awesome. Thanks. Let's see. Adnan has asked, can you give an example of listening for possibilities that will solve your care as well as another person's, for example, manager's care?
Yes, I think the example which I just gave.
I think that's, yeah.
Yes. So if I'm talking to my manager and my manager is getting frustrated, even when I am wanting to fix things, take on bigger projects, first of all, why are you frustrated? Like, I sense some frustration. Tell me what is happening. So understand where that is coming from. And that might be something totally unrelated to work, right? The person might be having a bad day at work. That person might be having a personal issue, or the person might have some concern about the team. And this is true for most managers, right? Every manager wants the team to succeed. So that's anyways something which managers care about, and they want themselves to grow. Everybody wants promotion. Everybody wants growth. So that is their care, which is easily visible, but there might be other cares which you do not see. So let's say you're ambitious and you want to work more, but your manager appreciates work-life balance a lot. That's a different care, right? That's a different care. So now how can you present your ideas in a way that does not violate his sense of work-life? How can you put your ambition in a frame so that your ambition is taken care of, as well as the manager's care of either growth or team's performance? It's instead of saying, I want to do more, give me more. Ask the person, what are your challenges? Ask the manager, what does the team need? How can I contribute? So it's a different way of framing your question, but that's how you listen for possibilities. And as soon as the person says something, oh, I have this challenge, or my director told me this something. Okay, maybe there is something I can do about it. So that's a light bulb for you as soon as you hear something like that.
Thanks for that answer. Let's see. Okay. Julian is asking, how do we spot and unlearn the fake stories we've made into truths?
Stories are not true or false. Stories are not fake or unfake. Like stories, even good or bad, true or false, are stories. If I see it as one way, I gave this example of a pen, right? If I say this pen is good, this pen is bad, that is a story. So stories are neutral. The only question is the story helping me, or is this story not helping me? And one way to identify, I think that's what the question is. One way to identify stories which is not helping me is to ask yourself, where do I not have the result that I want? So if I want a promotion, if I have been trying for a promotion and do not have this, or as a manager, if I want a particular metric to go up and I do not have that metric, then what might be my stories which is stopping me from collaborating, from doing whatever I need to do for that metric? This can be difficult. This might require some self-reflection. One way to short-sight this process is to ask for feedback from people around you. What am I missing here? What would you do if you were in my place? Because everybody listens differently. And when they share their story, when they share their view of things, they will give you an insight. Maybe you can look at it differently. So you say, my manager is this way, and you go and ask somebody else, and they tell you, oh, I didn't see that. I thought of this manager as this way. So you suddenly see that maybe this is a story which I'm making. Maybe I don't have to hold it so tightly. I can leave it aside, and then I can make a new story, or I can try to take action from a different place. So that's how I would approach that.
Perfect. There's one question from Baris. I hope I didn't butcher that name too much. It's similar to the questions before. Is how do I know what a person's intentions are?
You do not know unless you ask. So one way is to ask directly, but the second way, because you asking doesn't make a difference, right? If the other person does not have a listening for trust, the person will share their intention with you only if they trust you. The second way, which I shared, is listening. So when people are sharing, they're communicating their intentions all the time. And that happens through tone of voice, that happens through body language, that happens through emotions like frustration, anger, excitement. And that will tell you what they're into. And you might have to go a little bit deeper. Okay. I thought you would be excited and joyful at what I did. But on the other hand, I see a very neutral state. Tell me, how is it just not connecting to the results which our team wants to produce? Like, where am I missing? I'm missing something. Tell me, correct me if I'm wrong. So that's how you listen for something which is not resonating with you. And then you very gently, like you do not say, tell me what is your intention. Tell me what are you thinking? Why are you angry? Like, you very gently say, I'm missing something here. Can you help me understand this better? That's how you slowly build trust. That's how you slowly allow people to share what is happening internally for them with you. And that gives you new action to communicate.
Perfect. Yeah, actually, that's one of my key takeaways from your presentation also. I've noted, take your time to listen and give people the chance to speak out. So I think that's, yeah. All right. That was the last question. Maybe you can share some resources with our audience. Do you have some book recommendations or anything?
So I have my website, which is deployyourself.com. I write a lot there regularly, and I have some curated reports. It was there in the slides. I'm not sure. I can provide the slides to be provided as a resource later. There are a lot of reports, a small 20, 30 pages reports, which I share with my coaching clients. And normally they are like accessible when you sign up for my newsletter, but I can make it available directly through a direct PDF link for people who are there in the website. So Vincent, I can send you these links later on for people to access it.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do that. Perfect. Let's see. Oh, there is another question also from Nick. From your point of view, what impact does at-will employment, for example, in the USA, have on the employer-employee relationship that differs from the CDI in the...
Can you repeat that question? I think I did not understand it.
From your point of view, what impact does at-will employment in the USA have on the employer-employee relationship that differs from the CDI in the European Union?
Vincent, I'm not sure if I understand these words, CDI and at will. So if you or Nick can elaborate, I would love that. Because what I am sensing is I have a listening for these words. And if I speak from that listening, and it might be different from the question Nick is answering, I might not answer that question. So I would like to clarify first.
Right. Otherwise, maybe Nick can reach out to you directly and you can answer the question.
Sure.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm very active on LinkedIn, and anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. Okay. That was actually one of my questions anyways. I wanted to ask you if you're active on social media and tackle some questions from the audience there as well afterwards.
Sure.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Actually, that was the last question. Do you want to share something else with the audience?
I think what I shared in the beginning, like this is a lot about practice. This is just not about conceptual understanding. Because if you are not good at, let's say, public speaking, just knowing that this is a story does not make a difference because you're not used to that. You're not used to doing so. So when you go out there, it's very natural for the old story to come up, like as anxiety or as some fear. Right? So it's a lot about practice. It's about in the moment practice. Oh, this story is coming up again. How can I take a deep breath? How can I focus up again from what I have to speak to what other people are saying? What is the listening that I have to speak into? And what is my listening that am I speaking from a place of anxiety, from a place of fear? Or am I speaking to take care of what is there, what is happening? So practice, I think that's what the lasting comments. This is all about practice. You can understand it theoretically, but just like computer programming, you will get better at it when you practice.
I think that's always the case. Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, I would say thank you so much, Sumit, for your time and sharing all your knowledge with us. I loved your session. It was great. And I'm sure the audience enjoyed your talk the same way as I did. So thanks for that. And with that said, I would say we close this session. And I wish you and the audience a nice rest of our JavaScript Congress. And bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. Bye-bye.